I told myself not to move. I told myself to just sit still and not go anywhere near her. It wasn't my business, it had nothing to do with me. Yet she still stood up. She slung that heavy bag over her shoulder, as if it weighed more than she did herself. Her shoulders were tense, her gaze fixed intently on the court, as if, by staring long enough, someone would finally notice her. But no one ever would. By the time she'd reached halfway up the stands, I realized I'd already followed her. She hadn't heard my footsteps, not that she ever would. Normally, I'd have had a dozen ways to subdue her in seconds, slip a hood over her head, clamp my hand over her mouth. Within 10 seconds, she'd be gone. She was practically an open target. I'd spent years training precisely for this kind of silent, seamless operation, where the wooden planks don't creak underfoot, your breath is so light it goes unnoticed. Crouch low, move silently, disappear into the shadows. But when it comes to a girl like Penny Vale, you don't need any training at all, just patience. She stops at the edge of the court, shifting her weight slightly, as if trying to make herself even smaller. Her hair slips loose from its tie, few strands trembling gently in the light. Her hands clench and unclench at her sides, as if debating whether waving would seem too eager. Taylor doesn't even glance her way. He's too busy showing off, darting around a brunette girl whose every move as she snatches the ball looks more like flirtation than competition. She laughs with forced cheerfulness, deliberately pretending she can't kick the ball just to keep him close. I grip my teeth so hard my jaw aches. Penny takes another half step forward, her anticipation growing stronger. It's truly pathetic, not her, but him. He said he'd left her standing there, waiting endlessly. I blew a whistle, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the stadium's din like a gunshot. Taylor instantly looked up. Penny jumped in fright. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms, forcing myself to suppress the rising fury. He's my only younger brother, no matter how dumb or slow he is, I just have to put up with him. 2 real headaches, both of them. Taylor jogged over, grinning like an idiot, wiping sweat from his forehead as if he thought it made him look cool. Hey? Bro. Didn't know you were here. His tone was light and cheerful, utterly clueless and hopelessly goofy. I shrugged and said, I wasn't planning on coming, actually. He slapped me on the shoulder, acting like we were best friends. I almost managed to keep myself from snapping his hand off right then and there. He's my little brother, but I hate it when people touch me without asking first what's wrong. Mom said your car needs an oil change, he replied. I'll drive it over to the shop and get it fixed. He frowned slightly, as if he'd suddenly forgotten he even owned a car, then shrugged his shoulders, pulled the keys out of his pocket, and tossed them to me without a second thought. I caught the keys and clenched them tightly in my hand. The cold metal pressed against the palm of my hand. How are you going to get home? I asked. He shrugged again. Zoe or Joe can give me a ride. Of course they could. He turned around, wrapped his arm around Penny, pulling her close as if she were a piece of furniture he'd almost forgotten about. He leaned casually against her, and she, in turn, nestled against him. Her forced smile, so polite yet stiff, had been plastered on her face ever since she stepped off the stage. I think I'd better head home first, she said. My body still feels sore from the audition. Her tone was soft, her words casual, almost as if she'd already thought up an excuse for herself before he even had a chance to speak. Taylor pouted, really pouted, looking as though he were the one who'd been left behind. But we agreed we'd go get pizza together, he complained. I stared at him, wondering if he didn't find his own words utterly ridiculous himself. I hadn't known this girl long, yet it felt as though she were an open book. All it took was one glance, and her eyes would tell me everything. Those big green eyes drove me crazy, so trusting, so sad, so expressive, so... I couldn't even put it into words. Penny's smile tightened even further, becoming smaller and more reserved. You stay, she said, have fun. I glanced at my younger brother, hoping he'd notice that his girlfriend wasn't happy at all, hoping he'd realize he should put an end to this whole charade and cheer her up the way he really ought to. For half a second, he hesitated, probably weighing whether it'd be easier to stay in the lively crowd or just take her home. Just then, the brunette girl called out to him, a voice loud, shrill, and piercing, and instantly, he made his decision. Taylor leaned down and quickly planted a kiss on Penny's lips, almost as if clocking in after work, then turned around without a second glance and bolted back toward the court. My gaze remained fixed on Penny. Taylor's figure completely slipped from my awareness. There was only her fragile strength, masked by an outward calm. I watched as her shoulders slumped, as if all her energy had been drained away. I saw how tightly she gripped the straps of her backpack, her knuckles turning white, as if those straps were the only thing left holding her upright. The feeling of heartache surged uncontrollably, and I wanted to step over and gently brush away the loneliness from her shoulder. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch either. She just stood there a little longer, staring at his departing back, then turned around, lowered her head, and started walking toward the parking lot, as if she were trying to hide herself completely. I stood there, watching her go, my fists clenched tightly in my pockets. I should have let her walk away. I should have turned around, gotten into Taylor's beat-up car, and driven far, far away. Because less than 24 hours earlier, I told myself this girl didn't matter at all. I didn't care about anyone, really, I didn't care about anyone. In this world, there was only right and wrong, safety and danger, and nothing more. To feel anything meant that when it all fell apart, you'd get hurt. So yeah, I should have let her go. But I didn't. I followed her. This time, I wasn't going to do it quietly anymore. The boots stomped heavily on the ground, deliberately making her hear them, letting her know someone was right behind her. Letting her know that she wouldn't be easily taken advantage of by bad people. She didn't turn around. She just kept walking forward, her pace slowing down. Under her hoodie, her shoulders remained tense, and the strands of hair scattered across her cheeks trembled gently in the breeze sneaking through the crack in the door. She stepped into the sports building, a place with empty walls, glaring lights overhead, and a lingering, unpleasant smell of rubber and sweat. Still, she didn't glance back once. Along the wall stood a long bench. She slumped onto it as if her body could no longer support her weight, resting her elbows on her knees. Her backpack slipped off her shoulder and hit the floor with a soft thud. I stopped a few steps away, my hands buried deep in my pockets. I watched her. My breathing was deliberately slow and steady. She raised her head, her brow furrowed tightly. "What do you want to do?" she asked. There was no fear in her voice, only exhaustion. It seemed that dealing with me was the one thing she simply didn't have the energy to do today. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. What could I possibly tell her? Should I confess that I was inexplicably drawn to the way she walked, as if she were carrying the weight of the entire world on her shoulders? Or should I tell her that in a world where I felt like tearing everything apart just to find some sense of belonging, she was the only person I ever wanted to protect? I stared at her. She stared back at me. She let out a soft sigh, its echo reverberating through the empty building, almost fading away. "Asha," she said, "we've only just met, haven't we? You don't know anything about me at all." She wasn't accusing me, she was merely stating a fact. I tilted my head slightly, studying her carefully, waiting for her to go on. She fiddled with the hem of her sleeve, her voice so low that I could barely hear it. "So, what do you think of me?" Her cheeks flushed and she hastily stammered, "I mean, I know you think I'm like a princess, kind of silly, careless," and she gave an awkward shrug and quickly added, "Never mind. What do I think of her? I think that if I were to touch her hair, it would lose its luster. If I were to caress her skin, my fingertips would burn her. I feel as though she possesses everything the rest of us lack, light, tenderness, and pure kindness, and if I got too close, I taint her, inadvertently destroying her. I think that if she knew about all the things I've done, all the desires I've harbored, she'd never sit this close to me again. I feel utterly trapped, utterly pathetic." And yet, not a single word of all this did I actually say. I just stood there, my heart pounding wildly in my chest, feeling as though I were struggling against every instinct I'd ever been trained to follow. Finally, I said, "Why don't you just tell him?" She frowned, her brow furrowed. "Tell him what?" "Taylor," I replied, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Why don't you just tell him?" She blinked, still utterly confused. "Tell him," I ground out through clenched teeth, "when he messes up. Penny lowered her head, staring at her intertwined fingers. It's not, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. She took a deep breath and continued, what he did wasn't really wrong. He's just, kind, friendly. He didn't mean to hurt me. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek, tasting the metallic tang of blood. She just didn't get it. She was making excuses for him, as if it were her duty to forgive the things that slowly wore her down. Don't you think you have the right to ask others to stop and pay attention to you? I asked. She shrugged helplessly. I can't, she said simply, I don't deserve it. No, you do. Damn it, you absolutely do. In my mind, we're having a whole other conversation. In my mind, I'd cup her face in my hands and tell her that no matter whether she thinks she's worthy or not, she deserves to be someone's entire world. In my mind, I'd tell her that whenever someone makes her feel small, she should bravely stand up for herself. But I didn't say any of that out loud. I couldn't. All I managed to say was, either way, he should have known this would hurt you. Penny exhaled slowly and wearily, then stood up and reached for her backpack. If you came here just to make me feel even more guilty, she said, her voice tight, then you've succeeded. She turned to leave. Panic surged through me in an instant, nearly suffocating me. Don't go, I said. She paused mid-step. Without a second's hesitation, I stepped forward, my voice as steady, low, and husky as I could make it. Come with me, I said. I'm going to fix Taylor's car. Once it's done, I'll take you home. I didn't know why I'd said those words. I didn't know why I just couldn't let her go. All I knew was that I wasn't ready to watch her walk away from me, not now, not today. She hesitated, biting her lip. Her gaze slipped past me, toward the double doors leading out to the court, where Taylor was still standing there, laughing and kicking the ball around as if he hadn't missed a single moment. Then she turned back to look at me. A flicker of emotion crossed her face, maybe hesitation, maybe trust, I don't know which is worse, she finally said. She bent down to pick up her backpack, but I reached out first and scooped it up before she could. Her mouth opened as if she were about to protest, but I didn't give her a chance. I slung the bag over my shoulder and started walking toward the parking lot, slowing my pace so she could keep up easily without having to hurry. The sound of her footsteps softly echoed beside me, smaller, lighter, as if she'd always belonged right here. Maybe that was precisely the problem. Because in the brief time I'd known her, at some point along the way, she'd ceased to be that silly, reckless girl who needed to face reality. At some point, she transformed into someone completely different.
I sat cross-legged on a rickety metal chair that wobbled slightly with every movement, watching Ash repair Taylor's car. He said he'd fix the car, I thought. I figured he'd toss the keys to the garage mechanic and then lean against the wall, striking a cool pose for an hour, or maybe even longer. But instead, this is what happened. Ash himself got down to work, rolling up his sleeves to his elbows, his hands smeared with grease. Every time he tightened a bolt or bent over to inspect something under the hood, the muscles in his arms bulged beneath his faded black shirt, tense and taut. Veins stood out sharply on his forearms, clearly visible, almost as if all the tension in his body were coiled just beneath his skin, ready to burst forth at any moment. I quickly looked away, but my cheeks burned uncontrollably. Before, I'd always seen him as dangerous and aloof, but now, watching him so absorbed in his work, I noticed a quiet kind of charm hidden in his eyes and brows, and somehow, it made my heart flutter inexplicably.
Great.
That's just great. Maybe I should keep staring at this man who hasn't even smiled at me once today. Totally normal behavior. Still, I'm really grateful he invited me along. If it hadn't been for him, I probably would have already gone home, curled up in bed, letting the darkness slowly swallow me whole. This is actually better this way. This way, it helps distract me. I crossed my legs and tapped my fingers lightly against my ankle, silently watching him work for about 2 minutes before finally deciding. Screw it. If he's going to keep sulking like this, I'd just love to see how long it takes to snap him out of it. Let me ask you something serious, I said, tilting my head slightly and deliberately softening my tone. My gaze couldn't help but linger a fraction of a second longer on his sharply defined profile. He snorted softly, yet he glanced up at me briefly, and in his eyes, the previous coldness had melted away, replaced by a barely perceptible hint of indulgence. I took that as a sign of agreement. How long can you hold your breath underwater? 3 minutes, he said, not looking up as he tightened something with a wrench. I blinked once. That's terrifying. He shrugged, as if it were no big deal at all. I gave the chair leg a gentle kick. Do you actually eat proper meals in the Navy, or do you just live on protein bars and sour food specials? Proper meals, he replied, reaching for another tool. Then he paused briefly. Mostly sour food, he added. I couldn't help but let out a snort of laughter. Progress. Leaning forward, elbows resting on my knees, I asked, Are you afraid of the dark? Not at all. Not even a little bit? Not a bit. Oh my gosh, he's harder to communicate with than a magic 8-ball. Still no smile. I narrowed my eyes and started tapping my fingers again, deep in thought. New strategy, random, nonsensical questions. I sat up straight, clasping my hands together as if I were conducting a super serious government interview with him. Can you kill someone with just one hand? This time he paused. He straightened up slightly, turned his head, and fixed his gaze on me. No casual glance at all. Instead, through his thick eyelashes, his deep eyes locked onto my face, carrying a hint of curiosity. He didn't answer. Instead, he slowly raised one eyebrow, and the corner of his mouth seemed to curve ever so slightly into a faint smile. His expression seemed to say, What do you think? Yet his eyes never wavered. They remained firmly fixed on me, making my heart inexplicably skip a beat. The air between us suddenly froze, and a certain intense, unfamiliar emotion began to creep in unnoticed. I cleared my throat, pretending not to feel embarrassed, and continued. Well, that's a stupid question. My tone was light and cheerful. You're probably some kind of level 12 ninja assassin or something, right? He didn't even bother correcting me. He simply bent down again, disappearing beneath the hood once more. I kept pressing on. Now it had become my mission. Have you ever been attacked by a shark? Stranded on a deserted island? Escaped from a prisoner of war camp?
No, no, no.
Each answer was brief and curt. I let out a thoughtful hum. Well, that's disappointing, isn't it? A moment later, Ash tightened the last component, wiped his hands with a rag, then leaned against the car body, arms crossed, staring straight at me. Are you always this talkative? He asked, his voice dropping slightly, tinged with a barely perceptible hint of amusement. His gaze lingered on my flushed cheeks, never wavering. I pretended to furrow my brow in deep thought, tapping my chin. Most of the time I am. He nodded seriously. No wonder Taylor rather go play soccer. I blinked once. Was Asher Hayes just kidding around? For a split second, I was so stunned that I couldn't say a word. Then, laughter burst out uncontrollably, bright, sudden, and echoing especially loudly in the empty garage. You're such a jerk, I said, half laughing, half scolding. I grabbed the nearest thing at hand, a crumpled rag, and threw it at him. He caught it without even batting an eyelid, then neatly set it down on the workbench as if I'd handed him something fragile. I covered my mouth to stifle another wave of laughter, staring at him as if I'd just spotted a rare wild animal. Grumpy Mechanic makes his first joke in the wild of a rare sighting. He shook his head in exasperation, as if he were disappointed in me, then went right back to fixing the car. After that, I fell silent. Not because I was angry, far from it, but simply because just looking at him was enough. Watching his movements, his focus. Even when he was still, there was an intense tension radiating from him. He was so different from Taylor, so different from everyone else I'd ever known. Taylor's kindness was loud and superficial, while Asher's gentleness lay hidden in his silence, clumsy yet genuine. It made my chest feel strangely tight, yet warm at the same time. He scared me, and yet I couldn't help wanting to get closer. That sense of safety was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I just sat there, my legs gently swinging back and forth, letting the silence stretch out between us. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't empty. It was just there.